Brave New World, Pilgrim. Everyone knows the story of the Pilgrim Fathers. It goes something like this. In 1620, a group of devout Puritans left England on the Mayflower. Their plan was to escape religious persecution and start a new colony in America, where they would be free to practice their faith and could live in peace and harmony. Like a lot of famous stories, this is partly true and partly tripe. For a start, not everyone on board the ship was a Puritan. The Puritans didn't have enough money or people to go off alone, so they had to join a bigger group. And however you looked at it, this was something of a bummer. The fact that they called the rest of the group the strangers tells you everything you need to know about their attitude. For a start, the Puritans had a strict religious lifestyle and were very worried about sin. Their idea of sin included a lot of things which other people really enjoyed or thought of as normal, like dancing or makeup. And it wasn't good enough just to avoid these things yourself. They believed that simply being around other people who were sinning was dangerous. They might tempt you into bad habits, or God might decide to punish everyone in the community with sickness or failed crops. Sin was very bad news for the Puritans. As far as the strangers were concerned, though, the Puritans were weird and extreme. They didn't see themselves as especially wicked or sinful, just ordinary people trying to get by. The strangers weren't leaving England for religious reasons necessarily. Some of them were hoping to get rich quick or find adventure. Some were in big trouble and needed to escape, and some had no choice. In the 17th century, it wasn't uncommon for orphaned or unwanted children to be sent away from their families to work as servants. If you were a child servant and your employers decided to go to America, well, you went too, like it or not. One thing which all of the different people on board the Mayflower had in common, though, was that they were all going to depend on one another. If they had any chance of surviving in the harsh conditions of a different continent, they had to cooperate. To do this, they came up with some agreed rules which they put down in writing, known today as the Mayflower Compact. We're going to step into the world of another, different and imagined group of settlers in America in 1620. They landed on a different part of the coast and set up their own colony. You will play the character of one of these people, but you won't get to choose which. You might find yourself as a man or a woman, gentry or a servant. This made a big difference to your life. In the 17th century, women had few rights and were expected to do whatever their husbands or fathers told them. Poor people were also supposed to know their place and do what rich people told them. Of course, in the New World, there was some wiggle room and scope to change the rules a bit. Remember too that you might also be either a Puritan or a stranger. You could be very afraid of sin and upset every time that someone takes a shortcut to sneak past the meeting house and bunk off church. Equally, you might be one of the strangers who finds the Puritans far too strict and boring. I'll hand you over now to Captain Edward Anderson, a sailor who visited this colony in 1625, and he can tell us a bit about some of the characters he met there.
First of all, I'll tell you about Jane Smith. Now, little Jane's an interesting character, a lass of just 16, but a canny one. She's a servant girl to the Munbys, a tight-fisted, miserable Puritan couple, and they wouldn't let their dog pee on a man, even if he were on fire, unless they paid him for it. Now, Jane was dragged over on the ship as a skivvy to this pair when she was just a half-starved orphan of 10 years old. The word is she only survived the crossing at all because one of the older women, Goodwife Leah, took pity on the little waif and cared for her. Now, Jane is still devoted to Goodwife Leah, who has become a sort of cunning woman in New Bottesford. Now, Goodwife Leah knows more about herbs and healing than anyone else in the colony, and she's teaching Jane a little bit of her craft. Of course, that's a dangerous side, as some of those whinging Puritans gossip that Goodwife Leah is a witch. I reckon that the only reason the Munbys put up with it is that they're hoping to make a bit of coin from Jane's talents in due course. They know that Goodwife Leah can't go on forever, and if they had any sense, they'd be more grateful to Jane and the Goodwife. But you can't expect sense from half-wits, can you? Mind you, I'm not saying that all the Puritans are like that. I met this Welsh lad I really liked. Morgan Jones his name was, and even though he had some strange religious views, he had a kind heart. He always stood up for the Goodwife Leah when he heard people whispering that she were a witch. He said her sort knew how to keep away evil spirits and the like, and that his own grandmother had been the same. If you don't listen to grandmothers and their wisdom, he said, you'll fall prey to all sorts of nasty things which lurk about lanes in the dark. He almost had a magic of his own as well. His job was to work with the horses, and you'd almost think he could talk to them like I'm talking to you. The dogs all followed him around as well. So, it's like I say, you get good and bad with all folk. And of course, being a pain in the backside isn't the same as being bad. Take Samuel Brewer, for instance. Now, I described Jane's master and mistress as bad, for instance, but not Master Brewer. He isn't a bad man, but equally, I wouldn't want to have to listen to his conversation for more than 5 minutes. He's obsessed with sin and sees widgets and boggarts and heaven knows what else behind every hedge. Not only is he terrified of the good wife, he's driven to distraction by Master Elliot. Now, Master Elliot's a proper rascal, with less shame than an alley cat, but it's hard to really take against him. He came to America hoping to make money, despite being a gentleman. I gather he'd lost a fair bit of money back home gambling and living the high life. He's got no morals, but no malice either. He wouldn't hurt anyone out of spite, but at the same time, if it's a choice between your comfort or his, he'll not hesitate to put himself first. There's certainly no way on God's green earth that he'd sit through a Puritan prayer meeting when he could be at home eating pies, even though he knows that Samuel Brewer is having 40 fits about it. Not all of the Puritans are quite so serious though. Surprisingly enough, the preacher's wife, Mistress Harbottle, actually laughed about James Eliot and his love of pies. She's a clever woman and reads books in all sorts of languages, and her husband seems to be proud of it. I saw too that a little lad plays with a whip and top and has allowed time for his toys. I'd imagined that the Puritans and the minister's family would be the strictest of the lot, but it just goes to show that you never know with folks, do you? And if you want proof that you can never tell with folk, John Carter is an excellent example. He's a servant and no more of a Puritan than I am. Back in England, he worked as a gong farmer. It was his job to drive a stinking car overflowing with human turds, so I naively assumed that he would have wanted to get to America for a better life. Not a bit of it, though. He would love to go back to his old job, but he had to leave town because of an altercation with a blacksmith, and it was a straight choice between running away and being beaten to a pulp. So when I said how much he must be enjoying the clean air of America, I really put my foot in it. He'd rather go back to the life of the dung cart any day.